Hello, and welcome to Objective Health. I am your host, Erica, today, and joining me in our studio is Doug, Elliot, and Damien. Welcome to the show.
Hello.
Hello.
So, today we're going to talk about meat and the idea of nutritional psychiatry, which is a pretty interesting topic. Until recently, I was kind of unawares about this whole new realm in dealing with mental disorders, particularly depression. And so when reviewing for this show, there's a lot of articles that are starting to kind of cover this idea that depression could be directly related to diet. I guess it's not really a new topic, but it's getting a lot more traction. And this idea of nutritional psychiatry and how doctors like Georgia Ede and even Kelly Brogan have written pretty extensively about depression being cured or the reduction in symptoms by adding meat to your diet. So, and I know we'll have a lot to share here. Sometimes I feel like we cover this topic a lot, but it can really be helpful, especially I'm finding for women. 1 in 4 women suffer from depression. So is there something that people can do lifestyle-wise aside from psychiatric medication to start to alleviate the symptoms and bring about better mental health? So we have a quick little clip from a recent talk that Ede did, and we'll play it here just so you can kind of get an idea of where we're going with today's show.
This part doesn't have any sound, I think. Just so
It
you
should
know.
have sound, I think.
Just the dietary guidelines. Notice there's
I think there should be
not a lot of
sound right
meat
now.
on that plate.
Really?
Yeah. She's talking the whole time through it, so.
Oh, hang on a second. Let me see what happened here. Oh, yes, you're right. Okay, here we go.
Guidelines is 144 pages long. Imagine if a wild animal needed to refer to a document like this before it woke up and ate something. 144 pages, and it's based on a 436-page scientific report. And you might not think these matter too much, but they directly touch 1 in 4 Americans per month through school lunch programs and other federally funded programs. So a lot of people are forced to eat this way. They influence our educational curriculum for dietitians and other health professionals, and they influence other countries' dietary guidelines. I was just in Indonesia giving a talk in June about the dietary guidelines in Indonesia, and they're almost identical to the US dietary guidelines. So what patterns do they recommend? There are 3, and they're virtually identical with the exception of the vegetarian diet, which excludes meat. They're very, very difficult to tell apart. And it's because they both follow these patterns: higher in fruits, vegetables, grains, legumes, nuts, low-fat dairy, and lower in red meat, saturated fat, sodium added sugar, refined grains. And notice how interesting this is, that red meat is lumped in with a whole food, mind you, is lumped in with all of this junk. And that happens all the time. It's almost as though it comes out in the same breath, that red meat and refined grains, red meat and sugar, people can't separate them in their minds. So I wanted to understand how they came to these conclusions, and as a psychiatrist, I decided I was going to read the depression section of the report first. It was very short, I think it was 2 or 3 pages, and I immediately met full criteria for depression after reading it. So the committee's summary was this. This is what you see in the actual report. Patterns emphasizing red and processed meats and refined sugar, because you have to throw that right in there, were generally associated with increased risk of depression. So I thought, that's interesting because I'm not aware of any of that science. I mean, I've been reading this stuff for 10 years, looking specifically at mental health. So there were 19 citations, and again, afflicted with my aforementioned personality disorder, I decided to read every single one of them. And so this is what you find. It's just outrageous. So 16 of them, only 16 of them even evaluated meat. So 3 didn't even mention meat. You can throw those 3 out. So there are 14 epidemiological studies and 2 randomized controlled trials. Randomized controlled trials, for people who don't know, are just clinical experiments with human beings, and you choose a control and you compare your diet. So there was one epidemiological study that said that red meat was positively associated with an increased risk of depression, so red meat bad. But it's a questionnaire-based study, but there you have it. There were 6 epidemiological studies that lumped red meat in with refined carbohydrates and processed carbohydrates. So, I think that we can discard these. I don't think it's fair to judge, meat a la mode as the same as meat. And then we have 8 studies that found there was no association, no increased risk with red meat and depression. 7 were epidemiological studies, and 1 was a randomized controlled trial. And then there was 1 randomized controlled trial saying that meat actually reduced your risk of depression. So if you're keeping score at home, that's 9-1 in favor of red meat. And even if you throw in their meat a la mode study, it's still 9-7. So, I don't understand, on what planet can you then conclude that red meat is associated with a higher risk of depression? The committee outright lied about the outcomes of the studies that they handpicked to support their hypothesis. So this just was infuriating to me.
Yeah.
Rightly so.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just a kind of a quick look at all the shenanigans that go on behind the dietary guidelines. The idea that there's, they put up a front as if everything is scientifically backed, but really, just by throwing the references in there, they assume nobody's actually going to dig in and take a look, and it's incredibly misleading.
Yeah. There's definitely conscious manipulation right there.
Yeah. Conscious
manipulation. And it just kind of ties in with the, the ongoing, what's the word? The ongoing attack.
Propaganda.
Yeah, the propaganda, the outright attack against meat, all things meat and all things animal foods.
Yeah. I mean, right on the very face of it, it doesn't really make much sense that meat would cause depression, because humans have been eating meat basically as long as they have been humans. And if it was causing depression this entire time, don't you think somebody would have noticed? Maybe said, you know what, maybe we should stop hunting and gathering and just gather, because we get really sad every time we eat any of this meat. It just seems kind of obvious that, if you've been eating something for, who knows how long, 2 million years, whatever it might be, that it just seems so ridiculous to, the whole depression thing is a relatively modern problem. Not that depression didn't exist before, but that, how widespread it is right now. That's a 21st century phenomenon. And they would try and blame it on something that we've been doing throughout the entire history of the human race. It just does not make sense, just on the very face of it.
Yeah, it's like Georgia said herself, it's like, how can you lump in a whole food designed by nature? Like it grew out of the ground, literally. Like it grew out of the ground. Of course, it's not a plant, but what I mean by that is that it's derived from all things natural, right? Yeah. It's a natural occurrence on the human Earth. On planet Earth. It's not like the other junk, empty calories, refined, processed, toxic, fake, evil
Yeah.
Processed foods.
Yeah.
They don't even deserve to have the name food because it's non-food. How can you lump in a whole food with a non-food? Yeah, it stinks of corruption and some kind of financial gain and ideological possession, and it makes absolutely zero sense. And then when you look at the science, there's nothing to back it up.
Yeah.
There's no even theoretical basis for how meat would cause depression.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, if you look at, Georgia Ede actually had an article a while back called "The Brain Needs Animal Fat." I think she published it on Psychology Today. And she basically was just kind of going into what meat is composed of and what the brain is made of and what it utilizes. And it's all from meat. It's like the same stuff, right? It's like the fats for one thing, but I mean, even like all the proteins and everything like that, that is what your body needs. That is like the ideal food for what the brain uses in order to function. The making of neurotransmitters, the making, the nerve cells, the sheath, all that stuff, all completely composed of what you find in red meat. Meat in general, but red meat in particular. And the idea that your brain would misfunction or malfunction by eating meat, the stuff that it actually needs, just does not make any sense at all.
Yeah, there's a couple leading theories for depression. Like what they found is that there's usually some kind of an inflammatory component. There's also various imbalances. Like we can't kind of just, reduce depression, an extremely complex topic and probably extremely complex physiological process. We can't reduce that to an imbalance in neurotransmitters.
Right.
Like the serotonin theory, it's not as simple as that. It's not that you'll necessarily, any one person is deficient in any neurotransmitter per se. Actually, it differs between different people, right? And you can look at some of the metabolites for various kind of neurotransmitters or amino acids and things, and they are different. And two people can have depression. It's just being driven by a different thing. But essentially, yeah, if you look at the research, there's a couple of different pathways which have been shown to be off. Let's say that they're frequently off. And so some of those are related to certain neurotransmitters. So we have things like dopamine, we have GABA, we have glutamate, we have serotonin, we have all of these other different neurotransmitters. And these are, we were talking about in last show that they are somewhat responsible for at least influencing how we are feeling and how we perceive reality kind of thing. Right. And so if we look at some of the pathways involved in how we are metabolizing, how we're making those neurotransmitters, there's really important, because you have to understand that basically to be able to make brain chemicals, we need to use raw materials. And generally the raw materials for the majority of the amines, which are like a class of the neurotransmitters and hormones, we're using amino acids. Okay. We're using the amino acid tyrosine. We're using the amino acid glutamine. We're using the amino acid glycine. We're using the amino acid tryptophan, right? And so we take those amino acids and we convert them via enzymes, certain types of proteins, we convert them into these neurotransmitters, into these different brain chemicals. And to do that, we need nutrients, right? We need nutrients in the form of vitamins, in the form of minerals. So we look at some of the key vitamins involved in those processes. Zinc. Another one is vitamin B6. Another one is iron, and that is heme iron, not non-heme iron. Right. So the only place you find heme iron is animal foods, right?
Or Impossible Burgers or whatever the hell it is.
Well, yeah, naturally, you only find those things in animal foods. Yeah, the only place where you find any appreciable amount of zinc is animal foods, right? The only if you look at the amino acids, the highest sources of amino acids, tryptophan, tyrosine, glycine, animal foods. So the raw material that you need to make brain chemicals mostly comes from animal foods. The nutrient cofactors that you need to convert those amino acids into brain chemicals mostly comes from animal foods. So there's a real divide there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, even Erica, you were mentioning, oh my God, her name just left. Kelly Brogan, sorry.
Yeah.
Drew a blank
yes.
for a second there. And even she talks about in her practice how she needs to convince, I mean, she works primarily with women, and she needs to convince women to start eating meat again. Because the propaganda has been so heavy for so long that women think, oh, I'll lose weight and, I'll function better to eat lighter, like a vegetarian diet. But she has to convince them to get back on meat, and is seeing huge turnarounds in depression. And it just makes sense. It's almost like a meat deficiency is actually what causes depression, not meat in and of itself. It's like the complete and total opposite of what people are saying, what these dietary guidelines are saying.
Exactly. And it can be so misleading for our listeners and viewers. We recommend watching that entire talk by Georgia, because she talks a lot about, for example, and we've covered it pretty extensively, the Eat Lancet, propaganda campaign, and how if you don't have the time and energy and you're suffering from things like brain fog or low energy or these symptoms that are associated with depression, to have the energy and wherewithal to read through these types of studies that she's done. She even said in the video, it can cause mental illness. You think that you're trying to get to the bottom of your issues, and you're essentially now being fed this plant-based diet lie that the types of patients that Kelly Brogan sees, she's, initially will say, I'm going to recommend some meat. And if people are really anti, then she will say, I think this is not going to be a good fit, which says a lot about a intake consultation with a psychiatrist. I'm here to help you, but you got to be willing to kind of let go of your belief system that plant foods are going to save you. And we're also inundated by it. I feel like just in the last couple of months, it's just up the ante even more.
Yeah.
So, getting beyond that. And then, as Elliot was saying, this idea that depression is often an inflammatory condition. And Kelly Brogan has said that the medical literature has, for over 20 years, connected this idea of inflammation and mental illness. So it's like they have the data there, but then they go on to base their prescribing on this serotonin theory or chemical imbalance theory. And she says that there's not a single study that has proven depression is caused by a chemical imbalance of the brain. And, most of us don't know that, Another thing that she said that I found really kind of concerning is that, if you go to your doctor and your family practitioner, most of them are going to prescribe antidepressants. They're not going to take the time to find out what you're eating. Are you on a plant-based diet? Are you eating a lot of carbs, refined sugars? Do you have too much caffeine and alcohol? They're just going to prescribe you an antidepressant. And then you kind of go down this rabbit hole where for a lot of people, the symptoms just get worse. And they continue to eat the standard American diet. So it's really interesting to look at it this way and to see the rise in these types of depression symptoms and how it only seems to be getting worse.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. And it is also really interesting that there's been this kind of rise in interest in this idea of nutritional psychiatry. The idea that you could you imagine actually going to see a psychiatrist and they start asking you about your diet? It's so unheard of, like doctors, psychiatrists, none of those people get much in the way of nutrition training. And even if they do, it's going to be the dietary guidelines, just like we saw Georgia Ede tearing up a second ago. So it's actually kind of a real testament to these people who are willing to kind of put the research in and kind of connect the dots and recognize how important nutrition is in general, how important it is for the brain, thinking, mood, those sorts of things, and to be able to see past the propaganda and recognize that no, it's actually meat is kind of the most important thing here. It's not, a plant-based diet is not going to cut it.
It really isn't. And I feel like people are being led astray in this way. I mean, one thing that is really interesting about Kelly Brogan is that she does this whole idea, and I'm going to butcher this word, of psychoimmunology.
Psychodeuroimmunology?
Yes, thank you. This whole idea that everything is really connected, right? So if you're willing to kind of do the work, put the work in, eliminate certain things that are causing, these inflammatory responses in your body, but also to realize that everything is connected. And, it's almost like a health freedom in knowing, that what's happening in your gut is connected to your brain, and that there is a way to move forward with research that is being done by women like this to give people steps instead of just succumbing to the psychiatry. And just looking for some other stuff here they were talking about. One thing that Kelly Brogan talks about too is that, especially with depression, it's like sometimes it's a necessary phase to go through to address the issues that you're having in your life, and to start taking stock of, how much sleep you're getting, how much exercise you're getting, and how to move forward in ways that are going to be lifelong health. Like it makes me think too of like Jordan Peterson and Mikhaila Peterson, and, how he had struggled with depression and decided to do the carnivore diet, and how much traction has happened with people listening to him for, how to clean your room and be more of a functioning human being, but also how they have real life stories of how going on the carnivore diet really helped alleviate a lot of those symptoms associated with depression. And
yeah.
So I think we're going to see a lot more of it. I think a lot more people are coming out. I mean, just this book, I have it here, that Kelly Brogan, A Mind of Your Own. I mean, it's over 500 pages, and she talks a lot about about people's testimonials. And I do think testimonials are really important, because you get to see the process that people went through. And for some people, it's just a matter of weeks of reintroducing red meat and whatnot, that they saw a change in energy levels and mood stability, and even in sleep.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that, Jordan and Mikhaila Peterson, like you just brought up, they're a very interesting case, because they actually found that they were having to eliminate all plant foods as a means of kind of addressing the issues that they were going through. And I don't think that they're alone in that. There are other people. It might be relatively rare, but there are certainly people who they just can't do any plant foods at all. But it's like it's so far outside of the mainstream, because they would have you believe that it's the meat that's the problem. But these guys are a living testament to the fact that it isn't the meat. It's like they went on a diet of only meat, and it turned their problems around.
Yeah, I've got tens of clients of people who try their best to add implants, and they simply can't, Right. And actually, when they do, I mean, I've just got so many, the same story over and over and over again. It's like, as soon as they add implants, boom, the depression kicks in. Jeez. Or the severe fatigue, or the anxiety, or the dizziness, and the kind of immune kind of symptoms. It's like a real severe thing. Mm-hmm. And there's just so many people who find that that's the case. And it's like, it's actually the opposite of what, of this kind of idea that meat causes depression. In fact, in some people, it's the only way that they can survive without living through depression. Yeah. It's a terrible place to be in, but I mean, at least there's a solution.
Yeah, exactly.
Mitigation.
If it can ever get through to people, because the fact of the matter is, if you've got all the kind of officials pushing this line that going more and more plant-based is the answer, or more likely not even connecting the dots between diet and mood disorders, it's actually pretty amazing when people do come across this information, and they do actually. So not only do they have to find it, they also have to be open-minded enough to throw out all the conventional wisdom and actually give something like this a try. I mean, you know, for some people, for a lot of people probably encountering anything like this, they'd be on kind of a more standard American diet, even if it is maybe a little bit healthier than you know, total junk food. But it's still, it's become the norm now to cut down on meat, you know. Let's you know, let's, even if we're going to eat meat, you know, let's do a couple of days a week where it's vegan or something along those lines. So to kind of come across information that completely goes against that, it's going to require a relatively open-minded person.
But I think, and I'm sure everyone listening and all of us here know someone who has suffered from debilitating depression and have gone through all the traditional medical avenues to try and treat it. And, you know, if you're desperate enough and you're like, well, I'll do the carnivore diet for a month and see what happens, and it actually works, those people are going to share that with other people.
Yeah.
You know, hey, why don't you try this? Why don't you try this? You know, this worked for me. And there is the power of being that testimony for other people, and to see someone's mood change like that is pretty inspirational, I think. And I do feel that people have really lost confidence, especially in psychiatric medication for the or, you know, antidepressants, because maybe they have an effect for 2 weeks, but then they have side effects, and then you're dealing with all those, and then you get to this point where you know, it's not really working. You can try something different. I know there's a few things. Dr. Davis, he wrote the book Wheat Belly. He had an article called Depression, Why Not Start with a Nutritional Solution? And so there's just a few things that he suggests here about powerful nutritional and natural mood lifters. Obviously, he says to eliminate wheat and grains. He says that you know, a lot of things from paranoia and people with schizophrenia, mania, and people with bipolar disorder, impulsivity, and children with ADHD and depression. And people remove all the gliadin-derived opiates from wheats and grains. He also said vitamin D restoration. So he was talking about, and this article was published back in 2015, but he was talking about how even before he implemented wheat and grain elimination, he added vitamin D to help people. You may have more to share on that, Elliot, but supplementation with vitamin D. He also suggested fish oil and you know, regenerating cultivation of bowel flora for those that may be in the know, you know, getting your gut bacteria back into, you know, a healthy gut bacteria, and then tryptophan supplementation, exercise, and laughing, which I thought was kind of interesting, you know. You know, it could be helpful. So those are just some things. I think this is a fascinating topic, and for those who are listening, watching, we recommend watching Georgia's video, just because if you are one of those people that got duped by these nutritional studies, she uses some pretty strong language there about basically it's just propaganda, which I was like, wow, it's interesting to see somebody just coming right out and saying it, and that you have to use discernment when, you know, flipping through your news feed and seeing, oh, they eat Lancet, you know, plant-based. And because as we've said many times on this show, it's almost like as these ideas of meat helping people with mental, emotional, physical disorders, it's like the the vegetarian propaganda or the plant-based propaganda just goes into overdrive. So
Yeah.
Knowledge protects.
Indeed.
So I think that's about it. And again, for those interested, A Mind of Your Own by Dr. Kelly Brogan is also a great book. It's a pretty hefty read. Sometimes it's just nice to flip through a few pages and, okay. So thank you, Doug and Elliot and Damien, for being on the wheels of steel and running the show from the background. And we'll see you all again soon. Have a great day.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.